King Charles confirmed rumors after Prince Harry does DNA test and finds out he's not a royal family member. The announcement came in the early hours, released quietly, almost reluctantly, as though the palace hoped the world might miss it while it slept. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. But no one slept that night. The press was waiting, the headlines already half written, the whispers ready to explode into global chaos. A short statement appeared on the official royal website, signed off by King Charles himself. It did not deny what had been circulating. Instead, it spoke of personal matters of private nature and unconditional paternal affection. The words were careful, chosen with surgical precision, yet their tone carried something deeper, an exhaustion, a sadness, a kind of truth that could no longer be hidden. Across the world, people read between the lines. The phrase, unconditional paternal affection, became the focus of speculation. Commentators debated its meaning. Was it an indirect confirmation? Was the king trying to tell the world that he had known all along? Within hours, news channels dissected every syllable, every pause, every photograph released alongside the message. The image of King Charles, solemn, eyes lowered, framed against the muted background of Clarence House, only added to the gravity. The story had moved beyond rumor. It was now an event that could change how history remembered them all. For Harry, the statement was both a relief and a burden. He had spent his life being the subject of speculation, but never the author of it. Now, for the first time, he held a truth that even the crown could not control. The DNA test had confirmed what he had long feared. Genetically, he was not a descendant of King Charles. The science was clear. No manipulation, no fabrication. Just numbers, markers, and a lineage that veered away from the royal tree. He had imagined what such knowledge would feel like, a collapse, perhaps, or liberation. What he hadn't expected was the silence that followed, a hollow quiet that made the world feel unfamiliar. When he called his father again after the statement, there were no accusations, no arguments. Just long pauses. Charles, the man who had raised him, seemed older than ever. His voice was steady, but it carried the weight of something irreparable. "Harry," he said, "you are my son in every way that matters." Harry wanted to believe it. Part of him did. Yet part of him couldn't ignore the feeling that bloodlines, for all their cruelty, have power in royal life that love alone cannot undo. The media frenzy that followed was merciless. Old rumors were revived, old photographs reprinted, old interviews dissected as if they were crime scenes. James Hewitt's name appeared again on front pages, his past relationship with Diana resurrected with invasive enthusiasm. Experts in genealogy and royal history appeared on talk shows, speculating on the consequences. What would this mean for succession? For titles? For the monarchy's moral authority? The question burned through every conversation. If Harry wasn't of royal blood, what did that make him? And more dangerously, what did that make the monarchy that had built itself on lineage? Inside the royal household, panic met silence. Advisors convened emergency meetings to control the narrative. They debated issuing clarifications, but the king refused. "Truth," he reportedly told one aide, "has already spoken. We can't deny it now." It was a decision that shocked even those closest to him. For the first time in modern history, a reigning monarch had chosen acknowledgement over denial. The institution built on secrecy was now at the mercy of transparency, and the consequences were immediate. The royal press office was flooded with questions. Parliament whispered about constitutional implications. In pubs, in schools, in offices across the United Kingdom, people spoke about nothing else. But behind the public chaos was a private tragedy. For Charles, the revelation was not merely political, it was personal. It stripped away decades of certainty, forced him to confront the fragility of his own legacy. He had always been haunted by the shadow of Diana's memory. Now that shadow had returned, not as nostalgia, but as an unhealed wound. Sources close to the palace described him as broken yet composed, moving through his duties as if by muscle memory. At state meetings, he smiled, shook hands, delivered speeches about unity and endurance, all while the world questioned the authenticity of his own family bond. For Harry, the emotional fallout was worse. The revelation had given him truth, but not peace. He began to question everything: his childhood memories, his upbringing, even the meaning of his royal service. Every photograph with his father now looked like evidence of a lie. Every gesture of affection felt like a borrowed moment from another man's legacy. Meghan tried to comfort him, reminding him that the truth, painful as it was, could be the beginning of freedom. But Harry wasn't sure what freedom meant anymore. For a man who had walked away from the palace to find his identity, discovering that his blood didn't belong to it at all was like losing his foundation entirely. There were moments when he wished he could unread the results, forget the numbers, return to the comfort of assumption. Yet, there was no turning back. The story had escaped their control. Friends he hadn't heard from in years called with sympathy. Old rivals texted condolences. The tabloids spun every detail into spectacle. In the United States, late-night hosts joked about the prince who wasn't royal. In Britain, the tone was darker, less humor, more heartbreak. The monarchy was no longer untouchable, it had been humanized in the most painful way imaginable. As the weeks went by, the world began to see the story not just as a scandal, but as a symbol. Some called Harry brave for facing the truth, others reckless for digging up what should have remained buried. But no matter where people stood, one thing was clear, the illusion of royal perfection had shattered. What remained was a family like any other, flawed, wounded, bound by love and resentment in equal measure. For the first time, the world saw the monarchy not as divine, but as human. King Charles's confirmation changed everything, yet the mystery of his words lingered. Why did he choose to confirm rather than deny? Some believe it was guilt, a final act of honesty toward Diana's memory. Others think it was wisdom, an attempt to free the institution from lies that had festered too long. Whatever his reason, it marked a turning point. The monarchy, once defined by lineage, was now being forced to confront a new question: can love and duty survive without blood? As the introduction closes, one truth becomes clear. This story is not just about DNA. It's about belonging. It's about a man who spent his life trying to find where he fit in a world that measured worth by ancestry. It's about a father who had to face the possibility that love could outlive blood. And it's about a family, royal in name, human in pain, brought to its knees by a truth that no crown could protect them from. The rain returned that evening, gentle at first, then steady, tapping against the palace windows as if reminding those inside that nature doesn't care for titles. Somewhere in California, far from the gray skies of London, Harry stood by his window too, watching the same rain fall on another world. For the first time, he understood what it meant to be free of the crown and yet forever shaped by it. The test had answered one question, but it had opened 1,000 more. Who was he now? What did the truth mean for his children, for his future, for the family he left behind? And perhaps most hauntingly of all, had Diana known? That question, unspoken but lingering in every shadow, would drive the next chapters of this story. The truth had been revealed, but its consequences were only beginning to unfold. Because in the royal family, no secret ever ends quietly. And in the days to come, the world would discover that some truths are not just found, they are unleashed. It began, as all dangerous stories do, in the quiet corners of conversation, whispered by those who did not believe they would ever be heard. In the mid-1980s, when Princess Diana was at the height of her public charm and the royal family still maintained its veil of perfection, a rumor took root that would outlive nearly everyone who first told it. It started as nothing more than a whisper about the color of a boy's hair. But as the years passed, it grew teeth, and then wings, spreading beyond palace walls, beyond Britain, into the collective imagination of the world. Those who knew Diana described her as radiant yet restless, beautiful yet bruised by the institution she had married into. Beneath her effortless grace was a woman trapped between duty and desire, between the image she had to project and the life she longed to live. Charles, for all his royal decorum, was a man of routine and reserve. Diana was warmth, laughter, and light. Their incompatibility was not simply personal, it was elemental. By the time Harry was born in 1984, the cracks in the marriage were already visible. Charles's heart, it was whispered, belonged elsewhere, to a woman named Camilla. Diana, young, adored, and heartbreakingly alone, found herself searching for connection in a world that demanded she remain silent. And then came James Hewitt. Hewitt was no stranger to military honor. A cavalry officer in the household division, he embodied the kind of gallant charm that came naturally to men of his rank. Their paths crossed at a charity polo event. He was attentive, soft-spoken, and genuinely interested in her as a person, not as a symbol. For Diana, suffocating under the weight of royal expectation, it was a kind of rescue. He listened to her. He made her laugh. He made her feel, perhaps for the first time in years, seen. What began as friendship soon became something deeper. Their meetings were discreet but not invisible. In royal circles, nothing ever truly remains hidden. By the late 1980s, whispers of an affair began to circulate among the staff. It was an open secret, one of many that defined those years. Diana would later admit in interviews that her marriage had been a bit crowded. It was a statement loaded with quiet fury, a glimpse into the chaos behind the palace's polished facade. But what the public fixated on wasn't just the affair, it was the timing. The tabloids, never short on cruelty, began comparing photographs of young Harry with those of James Hewitt. The resemblance was striking: the red hair, the similar jawline, even the way both carried themselves with casual confidence. Soon, speculation turned into headlines. Was Harry really Prince Charles's son? It was a question that no royal dared to acknowledge and yet one that refused to fade. Charles's defenders dismissed it as nonsense. Harry was born before Diana met Hewitt, they insisted. That claim became the official line, repeated for decades whenever the rumor resurfaced. Yet skeptics argued that the dates didn't align as neatly as the palace suggested. The more the family denied, the more the public believed. For young Harry, the shadow of that rumor followed him from the moment he could understand language. He heard it in whispers at school, in cruel jokes from tabloids, even in the way strangers looked at him with that flicker of curiosity, the kind that asks questions without words. He would grow into a teenager known for mischief, rebellion, and a refusal to conform. Some saw defiance, others saw defense. Perhaps he acted out not because he didn't care about the rules, but because he knew he'd never truly belong within them. Diana, protective to the end, never publicly entertained the rumors. Yet, in private letters to friends, she wrote of the pain they caused. She knew how cruel the world could be to her sons, and she feared that truth, or lies, might one day consume them. "The boys will always be my greatest love," she wrote once. "But I fear the world will never let them simply be themselves." After her death in 1997, the rumor gained renewed life. With Diana gone, the story became legend, one that journalists resurrected whenever royal intrigue grew quiet. It was easier to gossip about paternity than to mourn a woman the world had collectively betrayed. And so, each generation of media found new ways to repackage the same question: if Harry was not Charles's biological son, what did that mean for the line of succession? What did it mean for the monarchy itself? Behind the spectacle, a real human being grew up carrying a wound that never healed. Every photo of him next to his father became a comparison test. Every time he smiled, commentators noted the differences. He once joked in an interview, "At least I've got Dad's ears," but even that lightheartedness couldn't mask the pain. The joke was armor, the laughter a form of survival. The royal family's silence was strategic. They knew denial would only fuel curiosity. Yet, that very silence left Harry exposed. When he joined the military, tabloids compared him not to his royal lineage, but to his supposed one. Like Hewitt, the soldier prince follows duty to the front lines, one headline read. No matter where he went, the ghost of that rumor followed. Within the palace, few dared discuss it openly, but everyone knew it existed, an unspoken shadow lurking beneath the family's polished public image. It was the secret that staff never mentioned by name, the kind of story that could destroy lives if ever confirmed. But for Harry, it wasn't politics. It was personal, a quiet, lifelong ache. As he entered adulthood, the media's obsession only intensified. His relationships, his temper, his every misstep, all of it was interpreted through that same cruel lens of doubt. When he and Meghan announced their withdrawal from royal duties decades later, many assumed it was rebellion. But perhaps it was exhaustion. A man can only live so long under suspicion before he begins to question himself. The whisper that began in the 1980s had survived 4 decades, outlasting Diana, outlasting scandal after scandal. It had become part of royal folklore, unproven, unforgotten, and undeniably powerful. Every generation of royal watchers told the story anew, each time with a fresh twist. And each time, the name, James Hewitt, appeared, the palace would flinch. Harry's eventual decision to take the DNA test did not emerge from nowhere. It was the inevitable conclusion of a story that had begun long before he was old enough to understand it. The rumors had never truly been about truth or lies. They were about belonging, about whether a man born into power could ever escape the weight of his birthright, or worse, the suspicion that it wasn't his to begin with. And so, as history will one day recall, before the test, before the confrontation, before the confirmation that shook the world, there was only the whisper. The one that refused to die. The one that shaped a prince's entire life without ever needing proof. The morning had begun like any other within the walls of Clarence House, quiet, structured, and soaked in ritual. Yet beneath the soft murmur of staff preparing breakfast and the faint hum of the corridor's clocks, a tension lingered, almost electric. It was a kind of silence that knew something unspoken was about to break. King Charles sat by the window of his private study, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the sprawling gardens below. The autumn sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, gilding his silver hair with an almost ghostly glow. He had not slept well. For weeks now, something had been gnawing at him, a weight that no title, crown, or ceremony could erase. In the corner of the room lay a box, small, old, and wrapped in a faded blue ribbon. It had been locked for decades, sealed since the late 1990s. The handwriting on the tag was unmistakable, Diana's. Inside were notes, diaries, fragments of a woman's heart. Some pages contained her private thoughts on love and loss. Others carried words she had never dared to say aloud, not to the press, not to her family, and certainly not to her husband. Charles had received the box from the palace archivist 2 nights earlier. It had been found in a long-forgotten section of storage, catalogued under Private Correspondence, 1980s. At first, he thought it best to leave it untouched. The past, after all, had done enough damage. But curiosity, or guilt, had a way of eroding restraint. When he finally untied the ribbon and unfolded the first page, his hands trembled. Charles, the letter began, if you're reading this, it means I am gone, and you are still here. Perhaps that is how it was always meant to be. You were built for duty, I was built for love. He paused. Her words, though written decades ago, felt alive. He could almost hear her voice, soft, deliberate, edged with sorrow. Each sentence seemed to peel away the years, pulling him back to a time when everything between them had been raw and unsolved. As he read on, a chill crept over him. Diana's writing shifted from affectionate to confessional. She spoke of loneliness, betrayal, and the ache of being misunderstood. But then, in one of the later letters, came something unexpected, something that made his breath catch in his throat. There is something I have carried that I could never speak of, not to the press, not even to you, she wrote. It has haunted me every day. I hope you will understand when I say that my heart belonged to more than one person during those years. And though I have always loved our boys, I sometimes feared that one day the truth would destroy them. Charles's fingers went cold. The implication was clear, even if she had not named it outright. It was the very thing that had plagued the monarchy for years, the rumor that refused to die. He folded the page carefully, as though it might crumble beneath his touch. For a long time, he sat in silence, his mind circling back to one thought: had Diana just confessed what everyone had always suspected? The knock on the door startled him. It was his private secretary. Your Majesty, the man said softly, Prince Harry is expected later this week. He has requested a private audience. Charles nodded, masking the flicker of unease that crossed his face. Yes, he said, his voice steady but hollow. Thank you. That will be all. When the door closed, he looked back at the box. The letters seemed almost to stare at him. It wasn't just what Diana had written, it was what she had left unsaid. The truth, or what might be the truth, now lay in his hands. But what would he do with it? Destroy it, deny it, or face it head on? In another part of London, Prince Harry sat alone in his study at Frogmore Cottage. The headlines had returned, again. A tabloid had republished old photographs of him and James Hewitt, claiming, new sources, had reignited the question of his parentage. He should have been used to it by now, but this time felt different. The story had resurfaced too suddenly, too aggressively, almost as if someone wanted him to react. He poured himself a drink and leaned back in his chair, scrolling through his phone. Each message from friends or aides was some version of the same question: have you seen what they're saying again? He had. He'd seen it for 30 years. What he hadn't seen, what he hadn't wanted to see, was how deeply it still bothered him. Megan had tried to calm him earlier that morning. You know it's rubbish, she'd said, touching his arm. You know the truth. But Harry wasn't sure what he knew anymore. What if the truth had been buried long before he ever had a chance to understand it? What if the silence of those around him wasn't protection, but concealment? A week later, he arrived at Clarence's house for what would be the most personal conversation he had ever had with his father. The drive there was suffocatingly quiet. As he stepped out of the car, the weight of the palace walls seemed to press down on him. The corridors smelled the same: polished wood, old books, faint perfume from another time. He remembered running down these halls as a boy, carefree, unaware of the whispers that would later define his life. When Charles entered the room, both men hesitated. There were 1,000 things to say, but neither knew where to begin. The king gestured for his son to sit. It's been too long, he said softly. It has, Harry replied, his voice guarded. For a few minutes, they spoke of formalities, the children, the weather, the press. But beneath the polite words, tension simmered. Finally, Harry broke the silence. Dad, he said, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest with me. Charles's expression shifted. Go on. Harry hesitated. Is there any truth to it? Any truth at all to what they say about me? For a moment, time seemed to stop. The room, the air, even the sound of their breathing froze. Charles stared at his son, not as a monarch, but as a man confronted with the past he could no longer escape. He thought of the letters, of Diana's confession, of the years of pain that had followed. Harry, he said slowly, you are my son. You always have been. It was the right answer, the only answer he could give. But something in his tone, something small, almost imperceptible, made Harry look at him differently. It wasn't